Claire couldn't stop thinking about the key. She found it on her bedside table that morning, sitting there as if it had always been there. But she knew it hadn't been. She would have noticed something like that. It was old, heavy, and rusted. Strange scrapes covered its surface, like markings left behind by claws. As she held it in her hand, she felt a coldness that seeped into her skin. It didn't make sense, but she knew exactly where it belonged. On the locked door at the end of the hall. The thought made her uneasy, but it was impossible to ignore. She tried to go about her morning. She made herself coffee, unpacked a few boxes, and even opened the windows to let in some fresh air. But her mind kept wandering back to the key. It felt like it was pulling her towards the door. Finally, she gave in. The hallway was silent as she made her way towards the door. Her footsteps echoed against the wooden floor, each one louder than the last. The air felt heavy, thicker somehow, like the house was holding its breath. When she reached the door, she stopped. Up close, it looked even stranger than she remembered. The carvings on the wood weren't just scratches. They were deliberately looking old. Some looked like symbols, others like letters from a language she couldn't recognize. Her fingers trembled as she slid the key into the lock. Then the click of the lock turning made her flinch. She hesitated, but only for a moment, before pushing open the door. A cold wind hit her, sharp and biting, and the smell of mildew wafted out from the darkness beyond. She fumbled with her flashlight and shone it inside. The room was small, windowless, and cramped. Shelves lined the walls, covered in dust and cobwebs. The air was stale, but there was another smell too. Metallic, like rusted iron. In the center of the room was a table, old and battered. Deep scratches covered its surface. On top of it was a single item, a leather-bound journal. Claire stepped inside, her heart pounding. The air was colder here, and her flashlight seemed dimmer, like the darkness was swallowing the light. She approached the table, her hand hovering over the journal. It felt wrong to touch it, but she couldn't stop herself. The moment her fingers brushed the leather, the whispers started again. At first, they were faint, almost like a breeze. But then they grew louder, surrounding her, coming from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. She froze, clutching the journal, and turned her flashlight towards the shelves. Nothing moved, but the whispers didn't stop. Her fingers shook as she opened the journal. The pages were filled with handwriting, elegant but hurried. It belonged to someone named Sarah. The first few entries seemed normal. Sarah wrote about her life in the house, about her family, and the man she loved but wasn't allowed to be with. But the entries quickly changed. Sarah began writing about hearing voices in the house, about seeing shadows move when no one else was there, and about feeling watched. One entry stopped Claire cold. The house knows everything. It wants to confess, but I can't. I won't. If you are reading this, leave. Get out before it's too late. Claire's flashlight flickered. For a moment, the room was plunged into darkness. When the light came back, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. Long, deep scratch marks on the wall, as if someone had been clawing at them. Then she heard it. A low growl. It started deep and rumbling, far away, but it grew louder, closer. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She turned towards the door, but the sound came again, and this time it was followed by something else. Something heavy being dragged across the floor. Panic surged through her. She clutched the journal to her chest and ran out of the room. She slammed the door shut behind her and bolted down the hallway. Back in her bedroom, she tried to calm herself. She opened the journal again, desperate for answers. The last page was smeared with something dark, something that looked like dried blood. The handwriting was messy, frantic, but she could make out a few words. The house is alive. It awaits. It watches. Before she could process what it meant, she heard it again. The dragging sound. This time, it was outside her bedroom door. Her heart pounded as she stared at the door. Slowly, the doorknob began to turn. And then, everything went dark. Claire couldn't stop staring at the door. The doorknob was turning, slowly, deliberately, like someone on the other side wanted her to know they were there. Her breathing quickened. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination. Maybe the old house was playing tricks on her. Maybe it was just the wind. Then, the turning stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Claire held her breath, waiting for something to happen. The air in the room felt heavy, like it was pressing down on her. And then it came. A loud thud hit the door. Claire gasped and stumbled backward, clutching the flashlight in her trembling hands. The sound echoed in the quiet room, making her heart pound even harder. Another thud, louder this time. The flashlight slipped from her grip and rolled across the floor. The beam danced wildly on the walls, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. She scrambled to grab it, her hands shaking so badly it took her 2 tries. As she picked it up, she heard a new sound. Scratching. It was faint at first, like nails dragging across wood, but it grew louder, deeper, more deliberate. Claire's stomach twisted. Whatever was on the other side of that door wasn't going away. She forced herself to speak. "Who is there?" Her voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. No answer. She gripped the flashlight tighter and tried again. Louder this time. "I am warning you. I have a weapon." It was a lie, but she hoped it would scare off whoever or whatever was out there. The scratching stopped. For a moment, the silence was so complete that Claire thought she might have imagined it all. She held her breath, listening, her ears straining for any sound. Then came the footsteps. Soft, slow, deliberate. They moved away from the door, fading down the hallway. Claire let out a shaky breath. She waited, counting to 10, then 20. When she was sure the sound was gone, she forced herself to move. She crept towards the door, each step making the floor creak beneath her. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. Slowly, she turned it and pulled the door open, just a crack. The hallway was empty. Her flashlight beam swept across the floor and walls. Nothing was there. No shadows, no figures, nothing that could explain the noises. But then she saw it. There were scratches on the outside of her bedroom door. Long, jagged marks, like claws, had raked across the wood. Her impulse was to run. Her pulse quickened as she stepped into the hallway. The air was colder here, and the silence was even heavier. She aimed her flashlight at the floor and noticed something dark smeared across the wood. Blood. A trail of it led away from the room, towards the stairs. Claire's mind raced. What could have left that trail? What was it doing in her house? She didn't want to follow it, but her feet seemed to move on their own. The blood trail led her down the stairs and into the front hallway. The front door was wide open, swinging gently in the cold night breeze. For a moment, she considered running outside. Maybe she could call for help. Maybe she could escape. But the blood trail didn't lead out the door. It turned sharply, heading towards the living room. Claire hesitated. Every instinct told her to turn around, to lock herself in her room and wait until morning. But she couldn't ignore it. The living room was dark, the flashlight barely cutting through the shadows. The trail of blood ended in front of the fireplace, where something large was lying on the floor. Her breath caught as she stepped closer. It was a deer. Oh, or what was left of one. Its body was mangled, twisted in ways that didn't seem possible. Its head was tilted at a strange angle, and its glassy, lifeless eyes stared straight at her. Claire stumbled back, her hand covering her mouth. That's when she noticed the walls. They were covered in scratches. Deep, jagged marks ran from floor to ceiling, crisscrossing each other like a frenzied attack. She turned and bolted back upstairs, her heart hammering in her chest. She slammed her bedroom door shut, locked it, and shoved the chair under the handle for good measures. Her hands were shaking as she opened the journal again. She flipped through the pages, desperate for answers. One page stood out. The handwriting was messy, the words almost unreadable, but she could just make them out. The house feeds on fear. It watches, it waits. Don't let it in. Claire felt a chill run through her. She could feel it now. The house. It was alive. It was watching her, waiting for her to fall apart. The whispers started again, louder this time. They surrounded her, circling her, closing in. Her flashlight flickered, then went out completely, plunging her into darkness. Please, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please, leave me alone. But the whispers didn't stop. And then, cutting through the noise, she heard a voice. It was low and guttural, and it sent a chill down her spine. Claire! Her name spoken in a way that made her blood run cold. Claire! What does the house want with Claire? And is there any way for her to escape?